Hello and welcome back. Right, so today we'll be looking at sexual harassment and some of the theories in this area. And this will help us understand why sexual harassment occurs or why people think it occurs and, what we can do to eliminate it and, what people generally feel about it. And then we'll also briefly look at the laws, in this area. Right, so I'm going to share my screen now. Okay, so sexual harassment. All right, so so this term, the term sexual harassment, was propounded by Catherine McKinnon in the 1970s, and it formed a significant part of the feminist research, since the 70s. And the definition, of sexual harassment would vary based on cultural backgrounds of the place where it occurs, or the legal consciousness of that society. So sexual harassment varies from one society to another, and it is interpreted differently and viewed differently, across different societies. All right, so let's look at some of the definitions that has been given in this area. The first one, we have the European Union Commission Code of Practice on Sexual Harassment, and it defines sexual harassment as an unwanted conduct of a sexual nature or other conduct based on sex affecting the dignity of men and women at work. Okay, so this includes unwelcome physical, verbal, or non-verbal conduct. From this definition, we can see that it is a conduct of a sexual nature that is unwanted, all right, and it's something that affects both men and women. All right, then Farley defines it as an unsolicited, non-reciprocal male behavior that asserts a woman's sex role over her function as a worker. All right, so this definition portrays a sexual harassment in a stereotypical manner. All right, so that's, it's like only men harass women at work. Okay, and it also focuses on women's roles rather than, it being sexual. Then we have MacDonald, who defined it as an abusive or counterproductive behavior which has hierarchical power at its core. All right, so this her definition focuses on power. All right, so it does not have anything to do with roles or sex, rather it has to do with power. Okay, and then McKinnon, okay, so that's Catherine McKinnon that I said propounded the theory. So she defined it as an unwanted imposition of sexual requirements in the context of a relationship of unequal power. All right, so from her definition, it shows that there is a relationship between the harasser and the victim. Okay, and that relationship exists in the context where one person has power over the other. All right, and we usually, tend to find it in work relationships where an employer has power over the employee. All right, so this employer would use his organizational power to extort and subordinate his weak employee sexually. All right, so from our lecture on sex discrimination, when we looked at the theory of gendered organization, even though, I didn't really draw this out, but, you could see that, men are more likely to be in top positions in employment. Okay, so that means they are more likely to be the employer, and women are more likely to be, the employee. All right, so in this context that we're looking at now, the employer is most likely to be a man, and the employee is most likely, to be a woman. All right, and then McKinnon also says that sexual harassment is obvious, when male supervisors, or customers, forcefully ask for, sexual favors. And then she went on to divide sexual harassment into two. Okay, so the first one, she called it quid pro quo, and then the second one, sexual harassment as a condition for work. All right, so quid pro quo literally means this for that. Okay, I give you this and you give me that. All right, so this is when an employer, in this context, is when an employer asks for sexual favors from the employee for an employment benefit. Okay, so in this type, the employee, has to give in to the sexual advances or face losing an employment benefit. And then the second one, that is a sexual harassment as a condition for work, this one rarely involves sexual demands. Okay, so but it involves making the woman's work condition unbearable. Okay, so in this type, the woman is harassed simply because she's a woman. Okay, and this can, be in form of, touching or making sexual jokes or sexual comments, towards her. Okay, so it has nothing, to do with giving her a benefit or denying her a benefit. All right, so let's look at, some of the, theories here. All right, so sexual harassment has been described as a social problem, which has been institutionalized because of the control men have over women's, survival at home, at work, and in education. All right, so and then women are found to be vulnerable to sexual harassment, because of the male-dominated structure that we see in work. Okay, we have looked at that in sex discrimination, and then you find that the employers, their managers and superiors, they are mostly men in positions of power. They have the power to hire and fire them. All right, then. In addition to this, women, fail to recognize sexual harassment as an abuse, because, the society expects or accepts that it is in a man's place, to make unsolicited sexual advances towards women. All right, so many feminist theories have given, various reasons why sexual harassment occurs at work. All right, so the first one that we're going to look at, is one of the leading ones given by Gutek, and she called it the sex role spillover. Okay, and she defined this as, she says, is the carryover of irrelevant or inappropriate gender-based roles into work settings. Okay, so say for example, this could happen in a workplace where, say, for instance, the managers, maybe they're having a meeting and they decide to ask a woman in that team to go and make tea, because that's a woman's job. And the woman in the team, should be the one, making that tea. Okay, so it's now the carryover of the relevant gender-based roles. Remember, again, from our sex discrimination lecture, women are expected to stay home and cook and look after the family. All right, so now when they now come into work, that sex role spills over into work. So they're expected to carry over those roles into work, right? So therefore, there's a meeting, a woman is most likely, be asked to go and make tea for all the others, even though they are all, on the same grade and level. All right, so Gutek said that, that sex role spillover occurs where the sex ratio is skewed in either direction. Okay, so if there are more women or more men, all right, so say, for instance, there are more men in that organization than there are women. All right, so when this happens, a person's sex becomes visible and people tend to enact gender roles. All right, so the organization would then assume the sex role of the majority. All right, so because there are more men in that organization, they would then tend to see women as women first before a worker. Okay, so therefore they will expect women to serve them because they're seeing them as a woman and not a worker. All right, so they expect them to serve them, and then men will then exhibit their own sex role. okay, which is a sex seeking and sexual aggression. All right, and they will use their their workplace as an opportunity to interact with women in a sexual manner. Okay, then some other theorists believe that sexual harassment occurs due to the power imbalance at work and society. All right, so we briefly looked at the data in our lecture on sex discrimination, and we found out that there are more men in positions of power and board of companies than there are women. All right, so these theorists believe that because men hold the highest power in organizations, some of them use this power to harass their female subordinates. And then we have Benson and Thomas, who believe that the experiences of sexual harassment that women have in organizations have elements of unequal power, involved. So since women started going out to work and participating in the labor market, there has now been an increased contact between them and their employers. All right. So when this happens, Benson and Thomas believe that this contact between the women and the employers will clash with the man's authority and his sexual attention towards her. Okay, so because of this authority that he has, he would then want to pursue her. And if the woman refuses his advances, he will use his authority to control her, by punishing her or even rewarding her if she gives in. Okay, so employers can use this power to conceal their sexual intentions towards the woman and try to manipulate them. Okay. However, let's say, for instance, that the workplace is just a small, workforce. Okay, it's not a big company, and in that company or in that workforce, the employer has the power, to hire and fire the employees. All right, so in such a place, their sexual advances towards the women, will be most likely be direct and clear. All right, because they believe that nobody will question them. Okay, so maybe they're the ones that own the company, so they feel that they can do whatever they want. All right, so in such an instance, they will be very clear to the woman about what they want. All right, so they will use their power to command sexual compliance from their female employees. Okay, to either submit, and sometimes the women would have no choice but to either submit or endure it, or they will resign. Right. So, but McKinnon, that's Catherine McKinnon, she does not think, that sexual harassment has anything to do with attraction. Okay, she does not think it's because the man finds the woman attractive. All right, she believes that it is about power and masculinity. So she believes that sexual harassment is a mechanism that men use to maintain the male dominance and female subordination. Subordination, yes, that we looked at, in sex discrimination. Okay, the male dominance and female subordination. Sexual harassment is a way men try to use that to maintain that divide. So that the employer would then, use his organizational power, to enforce his sexual authority on the woman. All right. So yeah, so it is a way, sexual harassment is a way to, control women. Then we have Charles, who sort of, looked at it from a different perspective. All right, so she believes that sexual harassment happens, because of the way roles are structured to give the impression of a male, of masculine attributes. All right, so therefore, men use their masculinity to undermine their female colleagues, because they believe that the men, fit better into those roles. All right, so this can be a way, to also exclude women, from the workforce. And then when women are made the object of a sexual attention, it also undermines their confidence as competent workers. Okay, and then Farley said that men use sexual harassment as a tool to dominate women and put them in where they believe is their rightful place. Okay, and this leads to segregation in the job market, and then you find a lot of women in low ranking jobs. And then McLaughlin et al., that and her colleagues, they came up with their own theory, which they called the power threat model. Okay, they believe that the power threat model is at the root of sexual harassment. Okay, so they said that women in authority are more likely to face sexual harassment because men feel that their superiority is being threatened by these women. Okay, because the women have organizational power over them. So thereby you find them challenging women in positions of power. All right, so they believe that this is why women in power are subjected to sexual harassment and discrimination. In order to undermine their position. Okay, so when they try to assert their authority, these men that are supposed to be subordinate to them, would tend to harass them. And then Bethel and co, her colleagues, they also believe in the power threat model. They believe that sexual harassment is about power, okay, and having the ability to influence and control other people. All right, so sexual harassment of women is more common, than sexual harassment of men because men have always been at the helm of affairs. Okay. Okay, right. So here, Bethel, they carried out a study on, sexual harassment of men and women, to sort of see how men and women experience sexual harassment. And this is, what they found. Okay, so they found that, first of all, men and women experience sexual harassment differently. Okay, they also found that women in power have also sexually harassed men. All right, so this aligns with the theory that sexual harassment is about having power. Okay, however, that they found that this is rare. It is rare for women to sexually harass men because it is uncommon to have female supervisors. Okay, so another reason why it is rare is that women do not have the social, historical, and physical power that male supervisors have. All right. So remember, the theory from sex discrimination that in society power is ascribed to men. Okay, and then on average, men are physically stronger than women. All right, so it will be rare for women to sexually harass men because women cannot invoke these powers. So this physical power that men have or the social power that men have, they cannot invoke it, to use it to harass men. Okay, so we find that female supervisors, even though they are the ones that have the organizational power, they end up being the ones harassed by their male subordinates. Because these male subordinates do have that social power, and they also have the physical power, and these powers override the organizational power that the female supervisor, has. Okay, so they use that to harass her. Okay. Yeah, then another reason again that you find it that, that is rare that, women sexually harass men is that it is against societal norms for women to aggressively pursue men sexually. Okay, so it's usually find men being the ones pursuing women and not the other way around. All right, so, and then even where women do harass men, I mean, this is what Bedell they found as well, that where women harass men, that men do not have the same sense of dread that women have. Okay, so they found that men would enjoy sexual harassment from women, because they believe that they actually have that control, that physical power, to sort of change the situation if they wish to. Okay, yeah, so they found that men will enjoy it, okay, but women experience it differently, okay, because for women, it takes place in a society, where we have male sexual violence, okay, that is widespread. All right, so something like this will scare women, because of this social and physical violence that is involved, when they receive unwanted sexual attention, from men. All right, but if it's the other way around, this would not, really bother men because they have the physical power to change the situation. Okay, so that's why women, dread sexual harassment. All right, it affects them mentally, it affects them emotionally and physically. Okay. Um, okay, yeah. So Bedell also found that more men, who report sexual harassment, have been harassed by other men. Okay. Again, it is in line with the theory that power is at the root of sexual harassment. Okay, because men have more organizational, societal, and physical power, to harass. Okay, then there is another element, that has been introduced here. All right, so we have Johnson, who brought in culture as factors that contribute to sexual harassment. He said that in patriarchal societies, where sexual prowess and virility are encouraged, that men will feel the need to pursue women in an aggressive manner. All right. So because of that, women, tend to be conditioned to accept, men's aggressiveness as normal. Then we also have Zimbroff, who believes that culture plays an important role in perception of sexual harassment. She thinks that that in she thinks that sexual harassment in a multicultural society will be complex to interpret. Okay, because people in a multicultural society, people are coming from different cultural backgrounds. Okay, so they have different perspective on things. All right, so they will view and perceive things differently. All right. So in patriarchal societies, where culture encourage men to make sexual advances, um, in such societies, sexual harassment, can be viewed as an innocent romantic gesture. All right. So therefore, people from such societies, would not find there are certain sexual advances that they will not find harmful, okay, or find it as abusive. Whereas in societies where it is frowned upon, some certain advances, will be found offensive. Okay, so this is, the theories around these areas and what researchers believe that causes sexual harassment. All right, so we're going to look at attitudes towards sexual harassment. Okay, so like I said, there are different people, react to sexual harassment differently. Okay, depending on their culture, the way they perceive things, and the legal consciousness of the society. Okay, so they would perceive it differently. Then in some organizations where they have a culture of making sexual jokes, maybe the organization is overly sexualized, you'll find that some female employees may find it difficult not to participate, in those jokes for fear of being excluded or called boring. All right, so this can, sometimes this can be dicey for women, because if an incident occurs, it may be viewed as though they brought it upon themselves. Okay, there is a case, Munchkin's restaurant, I think is in another slide. Okay, that's dealt with this. Okay, we also look at it, when we look on the when we have a lecture on harassment. Okay, so right, so we find that many women do not report sexual harassment because because they believe that reporting it will not change the situation. Okay. Others, may fear that they will not be believed, or they will be viewed as trouble. Okay, so they tend not to, try to report sexual harassment. And then some, sorry, some others, will believe that there will be adverse consequences, if they report it. Okay, so the employer maybe could retaliate or dismiss them. Then in traditional societies, it is believed that women are reluctant to report sexual harassment because they will be blamed for it. Okay, and then when this happens, then it could damage their reputation or the reputation of their families. Okay, and then again, it's also considered a taboo, for women to discuss sexual topics in public. All right, so this would, sort of deter them from reporting sexual harassment. Okay, so strategies that women use to prevent sexual harassment from occurring or escalating. Okay, so these are some of the strategies. Okay, you find some of them would ignore the harassment, by making light of the situation or going along with it as a joke. Okay, so I mentioned the case of Munchkins restaurant and Kamzin. Okay, so we covered that in another lecture. Okay, so the women joined in because it was the boss, the owner of the restaurant, all right, and they feared that they would lose their jobs. Okay, so they joined in the sexual jokes. All right, so this is one approach, just one strategies that women use, to sort of prevent it from occurring. Then you also find that some people will avoid the harasser or situations where that would happen. Okay, so if they tend not to be alone in an office or in an enclosed place or in the kitchen with the harasser, okay, so that you will not have the opportunity to harass them. And then some women, may be bold, to confront their harasser or even communicate to them and tell them, about their displeasure in what's going on. Okay, and then McDonald et al., they found that, powerful individuals who harass women make use of different strategies to suppress, outrage towards them. Okay, so they call this the outrage management model. Okay, and this includes cover up. Okay, so they carry out in cover up, they carry out the act away from people or witnesses. Okay, so when they do this, this will now make the victim keep quiet, because of shame or fear. Okay, so they will not be able to report it because nobody saw it. Okay, so and they might be afraid that this they will not be believed. Okay, so they will do something like this. And then the next one, it says the devaluation of the victim. Okay, so this will involve them, sort of using a derogatory labeling for her. Okay, they call her names or criticize her work or accuse her of being incompetent at work. Then there's a reinterpretation. Okay, so in this one, the harasser would deny, that they did whatever it is that happened, and even accuse the person, the victim, that they may have misinterpreted, what happened. And then we'll have official channels. Okay, so in this one, this is where the victim reports. They will report the harassment, and then the organization will claim that that they're looking into it, they're investigating and using appropriate procedure. Okay, so when they do that, kind of outrage towards them sort of tends to calm down. Okay, so we do see this in the media, where high-profile people, have been accused of sexual harassment, and then we'll hear, okay, that we are investigating it. And most times, it dies down and that's the end of it. Nobody hears anything about it again. All right, but where it's a low-level official that has, harassed a woman, you find those sort of organizations, they will try to use this person as a scapegoat, maybe dismiss them and punish them. Okay, and then we have intimidation and bribery. Okay, so this in this one, the victim can be intimidated and threatened with poor reference. Okay, or they will be sent to jobs that they don't like, a very difficult job, or even dismissed. Okay, so they have different ways to sort of these are powerful people to sort of dampen outrage against them or towards them. Okay, so as I mentioned earlier, sexual harassment, it does have a negative impact, on the women or the victim, and these are some of the things, that have been found that sexual harassment causes. Okay, so we have a decreased morale, we have a decreased job satisfaction, increased absenteeism, job loss, and then impact on relationship, with co-workers. Okay, it also has a negative impact on psychological well-being of the worker. Okay, and then it lowers the worker's organizational commitment and cause physical and mental ill health. Okay, so we have some researchers, they have come up with the suggestions on how, we can put an end to sexual harassment. All right, so we have Snyder and her colleagues, they say, to eliminate sexual harassment, that we need to identify factors that cause it, in the workplace. Okay, we need to identify factors that cause sexual harassment. So, when we're talking of factors, so we just looked at the power threat model. We looked at this sex roles spillover. There's a job subjugation of women, domination by men, all those sort of things. Okay, so we need to identify those factors first, and then develop strategies to change organizational behaviors. Okay, then also we also need to address gender imbalance in the workplace. Okay, because looking at the sexual spillover, so we saw how that can also play a part. Gender imbalance can play a part. And then also need to create a workplace where sexual harassment will be seriously frowned upon. Okay, it should not be tolerated, and anyone engaging in it, needs to be punished. And then we have Bell et al. Sorry, they equated sexual harassment to a chronic health problem. Okay, so and they made proposals on how to stop it. Okay, so they suggested that we should use a health-based method that is used in preventing chronic health problems. And this is known as a preventive management approach. Okay, so what they recommended is that we should use a primary prevention methods. Okay, so primary prevention methods is used in public health and preventive medicine. So what it does is to target diseases at the roots before it develops. Okay, so before a disease develops, they will try to stop it, okay, before it becomes a problem. All right, so they are suggesting that we should use this in sexual harassment. Okay, so we should use a primary prevention method, put that in place, develop strategies around that that would address the root cause of organizational health problems, before any of it develops. All right, so employers need to identify early warning signs of the sexual harassment, and then they use strategies such as education, training, and strong policies, to help stop it. All right, so that's it really for the theories around sexual harassment, and sort of proposals that we need to use to stop it. Okay, so these people have suggested a primary prevention method. Okay, so before it starts, what causes it? What can we do to stop it? Okay, so develop strategies around that, to help put an end to it. All right, so we're going to briefly look at the laws on sexual harassment. Okay, this lecture is focused on the theory. Okay, so the laws I'm going to look here is just going to be a summary. All right, so we have a lecture on harassment, where everything would be, I would accept everything, in the provision of the law. Okay, but I just want to have this here. All right. So right. So before we had any specific legislation on sexual harassment, claims of sexual harassment had to be brought as a direct sex discrimination claim. Okay, and this sort of created problems because, in direct discrimination, there is comparison involved. Okay, so in direct discrimination, again, like I said, we have lectures on the law. Okay, so all these are explained in detail there. But just for the purpose of this lecture, just know that in direct discrimination, if somebody is bringing a claim, the claimant has to show that they have been treated less favorably than another person. Okay, so this other person will be the comparator. All right. So, say for instance, if a woman is bringing a claim, that she has been discriminated against, okay, a claim for direct discrimination, she has to show that she has been treated less favorably than a man in the same situation as her. Okay. So that's direct discrimination. All right. So in sexual harassment claims, before we had a provision on sexual harassment, this is the only way that people had to bring a claim for sexual harassment, that they have been treated less favorably than a man. Okay. And this caused problems. All right. So I have these cases to illustrate it. All right. So we have the case of Pierce against the governing body of Mayfield Secondary School, okay, which was in 2003. All right, so in the case, the claimant was a teacher, okay, who was also a lesbian. All right, so she brought a claim for, in the school, she was regularly called names like Dyke and Les by the students. Okay, so she went off sick because of this and then took early retirement. And then she brought a claim against her employer, for not protecting her from the harassment. Okay, so because at this time, we did not have a specific provision for sexual harassment, okay? So she had to bring her claim as a sex discrimination. Okay, so remember, sex discrimination, she has to show that she was treated less favorably than a man, all right? But she failed, okay, because her comparator would have been, remember I said a man in the same situation as her, okay? So she was a lesbian woman, so that means her comparator would be a homosexual man, okay? So she was a homosexual woman, her comparator would be a homosexual man, all right? So her claim failed because this homosexual man would have equally suffered the same fate as her. Okay, the students would have, if the student knew he was homosexual, they would have still called him names that are usually used for gay men. Okay, so she wasn't treated less favorably than a homosexual man. Okay, so because of that, her claim failed. It was not less favorable treatment on the grounds of her sex. Okay, and then we have the next case, which is McDonald's against Advocate General for Scotland, again, which was in 2003 as well. Okay, so in this case, both male and female military staff were subjected to abusive and demeaning interrogation about their sex lives. Okay, so these were homosexuals. Okay, so both male and female homosexuals, they were treated alike. Okay, and they were interrogated, demeaned and all that, when they joined the military, right? And it was held that there was no discrimination on the grounds of sex. Okay, because even though they were both treated equally bad, they were treated badly, but they were treated equally badly. Okay, so nobody was treated better than the other because of their sex. Okay, and then we also have Stewart against Cleveland Guest Engineering in 1994. Okay, so in this case, the EAT found no error of law in an industrial tribunal's decision that the display of naked female pinups in a factory where the prevalent male attitude treated women as sex objects. All right, so in this case, a woman was working in the factory, where they put up pictures of naked women. Okay, so she found those pictures offensive, and complained to her employer, who did not do anything about it. And then the tribunal found that, a man could equally find those pictures offensive, all right? And the employer would have, still acted the same way towards the man, by not doing anything about it, all right? So therefore, the treatment was not on the grounds of her sex, okay? So you see how, sexual harassment, when brought as a direct sex discrimination claim, would fail, because of the comparison required, okay, and the treatment, had to be because of, the claimant's sex. Okay, so, but now we know we have this now in the Equality Act, okay, which is contained in section 26, subsection 2 of the Act. Again, we'll cover this in detail, okay, in another lecture. All right, so this provides that a person sexually harasses another if he engages in unwanted conduct of a sexual nature which has the purpose or effect of violating one's dignity or creating an intimidating, hostile, degrading, humiliating, or offensive environment. Okay, so by having that phrase, conduct of a sexual nature, all right, it removes the obstacle, created in that previous legislation, because the claimant does not have to show that the conduct is because of her sex. Okay, so all they need to show now is that that conduct is of a sexual nature. Okay, yeah. All right. So an employer can no longer, use the defense that both men and women were treated equally bad. Okay. So this would, reverse the decisions and, in the cases that we just looked at. Okay. So for instance, in Stewart, all she has to now show is that those pictures displayed are of a sexual nature, and it creates a humiliating or offensive environment for her. Okay, so the employer cannot say, oh, he does the same thing to a man. No, all right? So we don't need that comparison anymore. Okay, so all the claimant needs to show is that the conduct is of a sexual nature, and then it creates the offensive, humiliating, degrading, all those are listed in that section. Okay, and then so the conduct, could be in form of oral. Okay, so it can be things that were said to the claimant. Okay, so people making sexual remarks, okay, or sexual jokes. Okay, so see now this can now be covered. Sexual jokes is covered here. Remember in the theory by McKinnon, sexual harassment as a condition for work. Okay, sexual jokes is part of it. Now this will be covered. All right, then it could also be written or display of pictures, okay, like we just seen in the Stewart case, or it could be an act. Okay, it could be an act. That's an act that somebody has done. Okay, so I have heard of a thing of flashers. Okay, where somebody would open up and show you what you don't need to see. I don't know how people can be that crazy, but unfortunately it exists. Okay, so something like that, will be covered. Okay, so all this conduct, will be covered. All right, so the claimant must prove that the conduct was unwanted. All right, so the tribunal does not accept a defense, that the conduct was unwelcomed. Okay, so that would see in that case, that's the case I mentioned, the Munchkin's restaurant and Kamazin. Okay, so that the conduct was welcomed is not a defense. Okay. Then the section, also says that the conduct has the purpose or effect of violating the person's dignity, okay, or creating an intimidating, hostile, degrading, humiliating, or offensive environment. Okay, so a person will be liable if his purpose is to humiliate. Okay, so this person, okay, he will be liable if he set out. He had in mind, the intention to go and humiliate this woman. So he used this sexual joke or this flashing thing, to humiliate her. That's his aim, to humiliate her or to degrade her or to violate her dignity. Okay? So if that's his purpose, it will not matter anymore if the victim actually felt humiliated or not. But he set out to do it, then he will be held liable. Okay? And then the person will also be held liable because it says the other part of it says purpose or effect. Okay? So he will also be held liable if he did not have any intention to humiliate, okay, or degrade. He did not have any of that intention, but whatever it is that he has said, has now had that effect, okay, he will be held liable. Okay, so there are some cases that we'll look at when we look at the law on harassment. Okay, so he had the effect. He didn't have any intention, but whatever it is that was said or done had that effect of humiliating the person, he would also be held liable. Okay, then sexual harassment is judged from the victim's perspective. Okay, so how did the victim perceive it? Okay, and not from the view of a reasonable person. All right, but there are more to this. Okay, we'll cover it later on in another lecture. Okay, so but mostly the person's what's it called, perspective is what is considered. Okay, but then they also look at the view of a reasonable person, how a reasonable person would have viewed it. All right. And it is possible that an overly sensitive person may not be protected. Okay, and then section 26, subsection 3 of the Act provides that it is also harassment where a person rejects or submits to the conduct and she's treated less favorably than she would have been had she not rejected or submitted to that conduct. All right, so this provision aims to protect the victim from retaliation. Okay, so in the theories that I mentioned, okay, so they've asked her for sexual favors and she refuses, okay, and then she's now subjected to retaliation. Okay, so this provision will protect the victim from retaliation, which does not necessarily amount to harassment or sex discrimination. Okay, because the retaliation is no more harassment. She's been harassed, she rejected it, okay, and then they now retaliate. Okay, so that's no more harassment. So this section will cover that. All right, so if she refuses to submit to sexual harassment and then they were denied a job or promotion or any expected pay rise, okay, denial of a job or pay rise will not amount to sexual harassment. Okay, so they cannot bring a claim. But with this section, they can bring a claim because they have been treated less favorably for not submitting. Okay, and then men and women, who were not solicited. Okay, so if they were not, maybe if it's a workplace where the employer, seeks for sexual favors from women and they use that to promote them, okay, or give them pay rise. For those that were not solicited, so for the men that were not asked for sexual favors or the women that were not asked for sexual favors, they can also bring a claim for hostile environment under section 26(2). All right, because it means that the message the employer is trying to pass on here is that women are viewed as sexual objects. Okay, and this can create an offensive environment for some people. Okay, so once it creates the offensive environment, then they can institute a claim under that section. Okay, then we have instructing, causing, or inducing unlawful acts. All right, so section 111, okay, makes it unlawful for a person to instruct, cause, or directly or indirectly induce someone to discriminate, harass, or victimize another person, okay, or attempt to do so. So the person giving the instruction, must be in a relationship with the recipient of that instruction, okay, and in that relationship, okay, so discrimination, harassment, or victimization is prohibited. Okay, so that obviously would be a work relationship. Okay, so there's a case again. Okay, so it's there, Wethersfield and Sargent. Okay, we looked at that, or we looked at it in another lecture. All right, so this is where a lady brought a claim, because she was instructed to discriminate against Asians and colored people. Okay, so she was able to bring a claim bring a claim for against the employer. And then Section 112 provides that a person who knowingly aids another to do an act of unlawful discrimination will be treated as if he did the act himself. All right, so if somebody helps another person to discriminate against a third person, then that first person would also be held liable. Okay, unless if they reasonably rely on the statement of the person, asking them to discriminate. If they rely on that person telling them that they, what they were doing is not unlawful, yeah, then they may not be liable. Okay, yeah, that's it for sexual harassment and the theories around this area. Women, there's been data, that women do not report sexual harassment. But since this, recent Me Too movement, it's like, it seems like a lot of women are now having the courage to speak up and report it. Okay, so organizations, we have laws now. Okay, we do now have laws dedicated to this, but organizations need to do more, to put an end to it, using some of the strategies that have been highlighted. Okay, so yeah, so I think I'll bring this to an end here now, and I'll see you soon. Bye.